was intimidating. It was scary because, the last time I interacted with the University of Chicago faculty in an extended way, they were my professors, and I was sort of a young guy. I didn't really know all that much. And I think, you still think of them as people who are Mr. Cochran or Mr. Kaplan, and here I am up on a stage being treated as a peer and calling them by their first names, and I sort of feel like a kid borrowing his dad's suit or something and pretending he's a grown-up. But yeah, it was very, very fun. One thing I noticed with those guys on the stage is there wasn't a, here I know all the answers, let me tell you them. It was, here's a bunch of questions I have, and playing off of each other and finding it exciting that other people had different questions or different ideas. And that's what I find so valuable, the idea that human knowledge is not something that some experts have and other people don't have. It's a process. It's a exploratory process that keeps on going. I mean, that's what I enjoy so much, and that's what, for me, this panel was a perfect example of. I think there's a sort of common view among some people that University of Chicago economists are just against regulation. And I think this was also a reminder that, every single person on that stage was for regulation of one kind or another. Some of them were actually for regulations that would be, I think, in crude terms, much more aggressive or much harsher than the current bills before Congress. It's just they wanted that regulation to be based on data, based on research, based on what we understand about financial systems, not regulation maybe that, say, appeals to a popular narrative or something like that. John Cochran was very clear to say, our theories tell us and our beliefs show us that we cannot tell you what the stock market's going to be tomorrow or a year from now or 10 years from now. That's not the kind of forecasting we can do. But what we can do is dig into what are the incentives that are put in place by interventions in the market, and what are the likely outcomes of those incentives. They're on the highest level of intellectual rigor and deep theory, but it's rooted in the world we actually live in. I like probably a lot of people, I used to think finance was a very boring topic, and until I learned that finance is, and economics more broadly, is about how a resource is allocated in a society, why are some societies wealthier and others are poorer, how does a society as a group think about risk and think about reward and think about stability and instability. It touches on so many aspects of human behavior. And, I'm a public radio reporter. I'm not trying to get, I'm not doing a lot of trades or using it in that way. For me, it really is an intellectual pursuit and a pursuit to understand, the world I live in better. But I see how that deep analysis can so clearly help you understand aspects of the marketplace that, a more superficial approach wouldn't. As a journalist, particularly covering topics that are really in the news, a lot of the people you interview or I interview are people who sort of have their prepared talking points. And there's a lot of academics like that. It's not a very University of Chicago approach, but there's a lot of academics at other places that have that approach, a lot of think tank people, and obviously all the politicians have that approach, where whatever you ask them, you're not going to see them think, other than thinking to make sure they remembered their 6 talking points or whatever. And as radio, it's boring when someone's just repeating something that they've said 100 times already. And so for me, what made this fun and what made it feel like, there's the makings of some really good radio stories here, is you could see these guys thinking. You could see their brain work. You could see them coming up with ideas they hadn't thought of before, making connections they hadn't thought of before. And that is what I remember, what I miss about University of Chicago. It's that humility that, yes, I'm really smart. Yes, I'm a really good academic, but every day I can learn some new idea. Every day I can hear some question I don't have an answer to. And instead of being embarrassed and feeling like I have to just be a blowhard and pretend like I know everything, I can actually embrace that and do it with confidence and with pride and with pleasure. Embrace that constant exploration of the next idea. people talk a lot about the Chicago School of Economics as if everyone who teaches at Chicago Booth or University of Chicago Economics Department has one view on every issue. And that's an absurdity. I mean, even the kind of classic figures, Milton Friedman, Gary Becker, George Stigler, Ronald Coase, there's lots of things that they disagreed on. There's things that they disagreed with themselves on over time. It's the opposite of a place where you come up with some simple answers and then just apply them blindly over and over and over again. This is a place with an awful lot of very complicated and nuanced views on an awful lot of issues. Of course, there is a leaning towards solutions that are market-based and not government-based. I think for the vast majority of people who teach economics here, that's clearly where their preferences lie. But that is a very complicated worldview. But that's very complicated. I mean, we saw that on the panel. That every professor that I know of at University of Chicago believes there should be some sort of regulation. Should it be rules-based? Should it be based on the discretion of the regulators? How should it be coordinated internationally? Should it be a dynamic process that unfolds, or just a bunch of simple rules that exist for all time? The idea that there's a U of C view and a Chicago view on any economic issue or on all economic issues, it just drives me crazy as a graduate of the place. It's because it's an insult to how Chicago works. Chicago works by constantly questioning your assumptions, constantly questioning your conclusions, reworking the ideas over and over again, very quickly dropping ideas that only yesterday you firmly held because you've heard a new argument or you've seen some new data, and moving on and formulating a new argument. And so that's my pet peeve when people say, oh, the Chicago School of Economics.